We are live, ladies and gentlemen. I'm back streaming with OnlyFans. No one else tonight, just OnlyFans. No one else, just him. And now that joke will never die. But yeah, welcome
We're
everyone.
running a special too, by the way.
Yo, yeah. Oh God, let's not. But we are selling new shirts. Anyone who's interested? Easter is not pagan. Than, say it. I'm away from my mic. What does the shirt say?
Easter is pagan.
Oh, you got it wrong. You're fired.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll try better next time.
Let's try.
I can't wait. Matt, why is my shirt not here, Matt?
Yeah, Matt. Why does Stan not have a shirt? Matt. All right. Well, he'll figure that out. He heard the message. Matt is omnipresent. He hears all when we scream and cry. He always is there. Knows when we're sleeping, knows when we're awake. He's our social media manager. So tonight we are excited. We're both really excited. We're responding to Dan McClellan, who decided to respond to a short I did that we sort of edited together when I was on Timcast. And oh boy, let's not quote people that unless you're going to get them absolutely 100% right.
Yeah.
Because I don't quote people that I can email and talk to, because that's going to hurt when I bring up, because Than knows, but Dan McClellan, in this little response to me, decided to quote some scholars, and one of the scholars he quoted was Daryl Bach. And I read Daryl Bach's book that he quoted. I'm like, that doesn't sound right. So I emailed Daryl Bach, and Daryl Bach was like, no, that's not right either. So I got permission to share my email. I will share that later. But yeah, there's a lot of problems in Dan's video. Just his understanding of Gregory Nyssa, a misunderstanding of the history. The whole dispute is on the history of slavery. And I was arguing that Christianity was crucial for ending slavery. The abolitionist movement, I said, comes out of the Christian tradition. I still hold to that view. Dan's arguments are really straw manning at sometimes, missing the point, getting the scholarship wrong on this important issue. What were your thoughts, Than?
Yeah, I mean, man, I have a lot of thoughts. I'll just say this. I was actually really disappointed. I was just disappointed, I guess, because I was expecting more out of Dan. And by his own admission, he was quite literally grasping at straws and splitting hairs to try to just say that you're wrong when I think you can't really make the case. And we'll dig into why. I'm excited to.
Yeah. We'll dig into it for sure. There's a lot to go over, and we're going to get into it. But I mean, this is exciting because I've been studying this topic a lot lately, getting ready to do a video on it. So when he responded, I'm like, oh, all this knowledge is pretty deep in my head right now. It's all pretty, up in the forefront because I've been reading a lot of books. So I was like, hell yeah, we'll dive into this. And yeah. As I said, he quotes scholars, gets them wrong.
I had a lot of fun prepping for this, like studying for this too, because this was not on the top of my head. And you and I were in the hotel room getting ready for this, and you watched
when I was up
me
in
like
Wisconsin. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Typing out 40 pages of stuff that I probably won't be able to get into.
Yeah, I was on the other side of the room, and I'm like, this doesn't sound like this is what Daryl Bach is saying. I'll just email him. And then like an hour later, he got back to me, and I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. So
yeah.
So yeah. But before we get into it, just want you guys to know we do have OnlyFans with us today, but there's also out there Only Dan's ready for you. It says, give me your dogma and I'll show you my data. This is a horrible joke we started with Than. It just never dies. We have OnlyFans, now Only Dan's,
Who's
Only
next?
Ridvans. That'll be next. But we also have Only Mike's.
What's Cameron's going to be?
Only Cameron's. Only Cams. Oh, God. Oh, Lord.
Only Cams. Oh, man. My shower was nice. It was very quick.
Yeah. So like 10 minutes before we're live, I'm like, hey, we're ready. He's like, yeah, I'm going to go shower really quick. I'm like, okay. And he runs out and showers and comes back. I'm like, listen, when I like to shower, I take long, slow showers to relax. I lose track of time. Time does not exist in the shower, Than. I don't know what you're thinking.
I like to just go fast, get myself clean, get all the spots, and get out so I can get back to work. That's my style.
That's what she said. Anyway, let's get into Dan's response here.
Name of the next OnlyFans video.
We're in so much trouble. All right, let's get into Dan's response here to me on basically, I'm arguing that the abolitionist movement came out of the Christian tradition. Christianity was crucial for ending slavery. Dan's going to misunderstand that. He's going to put words in my mouth. So let's be clear. I never said Christianity, the abolitionist movement, only came from Christianity. I would say it was the main ingredient. It was crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere did I ever say this is the only thing, but he sort of read that into what I said. So let's get into this. I'll show you what I mean. Now, also, I put the captions on because his audio levels are really bad. Like when he's playing my clips, it's really high. When he's talking, it's kind of low. So I will try to fix that for you folks as we go. The reason why we think that slavery is wrong, human rights exist, that humanity has intrinsic value, and that children should be cared for, this comes out of the Christian tradition.
All right, let's see it.
In the ancient world, they were beat routinely. They were turned into sex slaves as children, boys and girls. It's horrifying to read. Slavery was just the norm.
And slavery would remain the norm within Christianity for well over 1,000 years. And all of these things would continue to happen. And people would appeal to the Bible in defense of slavery and those things happening.
Nope. Okay, let's stop there. So anytime we bring up that Christianity was crucial for ending slavery, we get the same argument from atheists, skeptics, critical scholars, that a similar tactic that Muslims use. It's just called whataboutism. Hey, we know this came out of the Christian tradition. Yeah, well, what about the slavery that the Christians did? That's all this is whataboutism.
100%. And this doesn't even actually like target the very part of the argument that you're trying to get at. I feel like even in the original video, it's like, let's deal with the actual, which he does in fairness, but this particular point just doesn't really have much to do with it.
Look, let me give an analogy. Like, ladies and gentlemen, this would be like if I said, hey, did you know that the U.S. was responsible for the Abraham Accords, those peace deals made in the Middle East? And then some guy was like, oh, but the U.S. has caused so many wars. Yeah, I know. That doesn't change the fact that the U.S. was responsible for those peace deals. Likewise, yes, Christians did justify slavery. That doesn't change the fact that Christianity was crucial for abolition. It doesn't change the fact that the abolitionists were using scripture as their justification for ending slavery. This is missing the point. The point is simply this. Everyone, everywhere in the past said slavery was okay. And they used whatever traditions, whatever experts they had to justify that, including in the Christian tradition. No one is denying that. However, something started to happen within Christianity. A new movement came out that led to abolition. So yes, we fully acknowledge Christians did justify slavery. Slavery was part of the Christian tradition. That does not change the fact that abolition also came out of the Christian tradition and that the Christianity was crucial for ending slavery. It was one of the main motivators, if not the main motivator. So this is just whataboutism, Dan. This doesn't change the actual history. Why is it that anytime we bring up this historical fact, you guys just go to whataboutism? That's what Muslims do. Come on.
I feel like part of the reason why we get this type of whataboutism response is because there's so many ways to try to interpret the central claim we're making here. So like if you had to boil down the central claim that you're trying to make here with Tim, what would it be?
With Tim?
Yeah. When you were making like when you were on Tim's pod with Justin, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, this is actually a misunderstanding. This is not when I was on with Justin. This was the prior time. So this was back in January and I was on with this.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The central point I'm making is that abolition came out of the Christian tradition and has a lot to do with Christian doctrines as to why abolition existed. And this is not coming from me. Again, this is coming from historians. Robert Fogel. The new abolitionist movement was a crusade in several senses. It was a militant and uncompromising war against slavery. It was a holy war inspired by the deep religious convictions of its leaders. John Coffey says the Protestant passion for liberty was fed by scripture. Abolitionists recalled the foundational significance of Exodus in Israel's history and argued that it revealed divine opposition to human systems of oppression and bondage. So this isn't coming from me. Yes, we fully acknowledge that as part of Christendom, Christian history, slavery did exist and Christians tried to justify slavery. That does not change the fact that Christianity also produced the abolitionist movement that became the dominant view that took over the overwhelming consensus of Christians in today's field, and that had a lot to do with underlying Christian doctrines and ideas that slowly began to saturate the culture, as Tom Holland says. So, and then Tom Holland acknowledges that too. This is who I'm getting this from, is a lot of his work on this about how Christianity slowly changed and saturated the culture. So again, the whataboutism just misses the whole point. None of this challenges the actual history behind abolition.
100%.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the next clip here. Let's pull this up before, and I will be playing some clips of my interview with Tom Holland in a little bit to clarify some things for Dan McClellan here. But let's play this next section. No one ever questioned the idea that slavery should be abolished until the Christians came on the scene. The first one to say slavery should be abolished was Gregory of Nyssa, working on what he was learning in the scriptures and reading Paul in Genesis.
So I want to highlight 4 objections to the rhetoric that is being presented.
Here we go.
First, Gregory of Nyssa did not actually call for the abolition of slavery. He condemned it as immoral and unjust and a violation of God's created order, and vehemently so, but he didn't actually call for its abolition. And while it may sound like I'm splitting hairs, that's actually an important distinction, and it flatly undermines this rhetoric, because the claim is that he was the first to call for the abolition of slavery.
He was.
And this is supposed to support the argument that the abolition of slavery comes out of the Christian worldview. Had he actually called for the abolition of slavery, he would have been the first, and that would have been significant weight added to the argument that the Christian worldview in and of itself, in isolation from all other worldviews, is the primary catalyst for the abolition of slavery.
Okay, let's stop there, because Dan just shot himself in the foot. Did you hear what he said there? Listen, he said...
I heard a lot.
He said, if Gregory did call for the abolition of slavery, this, and I quote, this would be significant weight added to the argument that the Christian worldview is in and of itself, in isolation, the primary catalyst for the abolition of slavery. 2 things. No one said it ended slavery in isolation. Dan added that meaning to what I said. In other words, he read that into what I was saying. I never said it ever developed in isolation. 2, Dan just shot himself in the foot. Because even if Gregory of Nyssa didn't, the first people to call for the end of slavery were Christians. So that, by Dan's own logic, that would add significant weight to the argument that the Christian worldview was responsible for abolition. And so guess what, ladies and gentlemen? So does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. There's tons of... Were you about to play a meme? I just heard the...
Yes,
gentlemen. There you go.
We got him.
Sorry, when I hit it, it didn't come up, so I had to like reset it. But yeah, it's he just kind of shot himself in the foot.
I didn't see the video.
I know it didn't play for some reason when I clicked it. Sorry about that. But yeah, I'm gonna play that again.
No, please do. Really quick, is there a delay between you and I? Do you feel a delay at all, or are we good?
Maybe a little bit. I don't know, but we'll be fine. I think it's not like a David Wood delay.
If there is a delay, I can just switch off my laptop and put it on my PC. It's not a big deal.
All right. So also with that, let's pull back up my slides. Is I was so slides here? Or is it later? No, later. So, but yeah, that's what I wanted to say there about that. Anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, he says it's splitting hairs, and like, I think he's right that there is a distinction between saying it's immoral and calling for its abolition. But when you get into the practices of like speech act theory, and you're talking about the fact that like the community that Gregory's talking to, I mean, calling something sinful is going to logically entail the abolition of the act itself. And so there's going to be plenty of times where you're going to call something immoral, and therefore you're saying, stop doing this, without explicitly saying the word, stop doing this. To Gregory's audience, they would have understood his speech act, the elocution of his words, to be
that's a good point,
the abolition of slavery. And so this is, in essence, splitting hairs, because this is the same type of argument people like to make when they say Jesus never claims to be God. But it's like, you're going to show all these things that he's doing to claim that he's God, and you're like, oh, but he doesn't say the actual words. And it's like the same thing. So...
Yeah, we're gonna get into Gregory of Nyssa. I've got an extended quote I'm gonna put up and some quotes from some other scholars. But let's get back to Dan here. Let's give him his fair hearing.
But he didn't call for its abolition. He condemned it.
Why is it not playing? Hold on.
And a violation of God's.
StreamYard's acting up.
All I see is a SWAT guy falling from the ceiling. Is that what I'm supposed to see?
I don't know. I don't know why it's doing that. Let me man, yeah, it's been acting up a little bit today, so sorry about that, everyone. Let me put this back up here, and then I will back up a little bit.
But he didn't call for its abolition. He condemned it as immoral and unjust and a violation of God's created order. And he was not the first to do that. There were representatives of different Greek philosophical schools that had already condemned slavery as unjust and immoral and a violation of God's created order prior to Gregory of Nyssa, in fact, prior to Christianity. We can go back to Aristotle and find him in his book On Politics referring obliquely to other philosophers who rejected the justice and the morality of slavery. And he uses that as a springboard into his argument for some people being born by nature slaves. Stoicism would reject that when it develops this notion that anyone with a rational soul is by nature free, and slavery is just an outcome of social convention and social practice. And we actually see this reflected in Nyssa's argument when he says in his fourth homily on Ecclesiastes that man is by nature free. This brings up another objection. Gregory of Nyssa was not objecting to slavery solely because he was reading Genesis and Paul in isolation from all other things. He was
real quick. Once again, this is a huge straw man from Dan. Never once did I say Christianity is solely in an isolation responsible for ending slavery. Notice he keeps adding those words as if that's what I was saying. I said in the Timcast clip, it comes out of the Christian tradition. And I have repeatedly said elsewhere, the Christian tradition was influenced by Greek philosophy and other things. In my video, Christian Virtue Ethics, I noted places where Christianity was influenced by Aristotle and Greek thought. No one ever said, not Tom Holland, not myself, none of the scholars I've cited, that Christianity is solely and uniquely responsible for ending slavery. We have always acknowledged there were other aspects, but what we argue is Christianity was the main ingredient or the main motivator. So this is a straw man. He's putting words in my mouth or interpreting them in uncharitable ways to make me say something I never said.
He was reading them through the interpretive lenses of Greek philosophical schools like Platonism, like Stoicism, like anti-Aristotelianism that emphasize human nature and freedom and natural law and things like that. And you're going to find every time you see an abolition
like that,
that it doesn't occur in isolation from the influence of those Greek philosophical ideas. And so Christianity certainly is an ingredient in abolitionism, but not the only ingredient. It's not the main catalyst, much less the only catalyst for abolitionism. These things don't occur without some of those Greek philosophical frameworks. And this.
Okay, so let's stop there. Okay. The contention we will argue is that it is definitely the main ingredient, by far the main ingredient. And for him to say otherwise, because, Greek influence, there was Greek thought that influenced, is absurd. This reminded me when he said this of a Jim Gaffigan joke, Than. There's a great Jim Gaffigan joke where he's like, think of the woman. Think of the woman. The woman can build a baby inside her body. And then with that same body, a woman can deliver a baby. And then with her body, a woman can feed the baby for years. And then if you think of what the man contributed to that, it's like, I helped too for like 5 minutes. And then I took a nap. That's what it's kind of like here. No one's denying there were other influences, but Christianity is the one that develops, gives birth to, and then feeds and grows this idea of abolition. Yes, there were other influences. No one's denying that Greek thought and the principles that are that we get from them, some of them did help with Christian thought and what they were thinking, but it's minimal in compared to what Christianity did. It's like saying I ate a steak dinner and then you getting mad at me. Yeah, but you also had a side of vegetables. Yes, but I can still call it a steak dinner because I'm referring to the main aspect of the dish. Christianity is the steak. Greek philosophy is like the side of broccoli. Like, let's be honest here.
Yeah, 100%. The other issues here are, I'm trying to figure out what thing I want to pick on here. Let's start here. He says that Gregory of Nyssa is going to be influenced by Greek thought. Then he lists Platonism, Aristotelianism, like all these other Greek schools of thought, which are all going to be predominantly pro-slavery when you read a lot of these things. The Stoics, we don't really know exactly what they're doing when they're arguing against, when they're talking about slavery, because most of the time Stoicism talks about the freedom of the self, right? And And it's not talking about whether or not you're going to be a slave to somebody else. This is about mastering yourself and not being a slave to your desires and all
Did
this
you
other
just see
stuff.
the super chat come in?
Which one?
5 minutes. Who's
Who's
Jim
Jim
Gaffigan trying to impress? That was good.
I actually don't know who that is.
Sorry, I had to stop you. That was too good. But continue on.
That's fine. So all I'm trying to say is like, okay, well, which Greek school of thought was Gregory going to be influenced by in specific relation to this? And where's the causal connection here? Because when we're going to look at Greek schools of thought that are allegedly anti-slavery in the same sense that Gregory is, well, the very person that Dan's quoting is arguing against people who it's not very clear whether or not they're actually arguing against slavery on ethical grounds or if they're just arguing against the justification for ethical grounds. So for instance, he cites uh, um, on politics why is the guy who wrote that, why is that escaping my head right now? Aristotle's on politics, and on politics, he doesn't really mention anybody in specific. So the philosopher he's arguing against, right? He's not mentioning anybody specific. All he's doing is saying some philosophers will argue that nobody is by nature a slave, but natural law dictates that people are slaves. Some people are slaves. He's just targeting the justification in the natural law, but he's not necessarily telling us whether or not these people thought slavery was bad. Now, that might sound like a nitpick, but it sounds like he's trying to make a mountain out of a molehill to like try to give some kind of a different model. But the model that best explains the historical phenomena that we see is going to be that Gregory was inspired by that the Imago Dei, and that was the central foundation, as he himself would say, is the reason why slavery is unethical. So I don't know why we're going to go to Greek philosophy when the person that's writing the text himself is saying, no, this is because of my theology.
Right. We'll get into that. But first, like, I don't know why Dan is like, I do know why, which we'll get into, but he's sort of saying it like, it's like, he's like the expert here. Christianity, Gregory of Nyssa didn't call for the abolition of slavery, but let's just quote some other people here. I interviewed Tom Holland on my channel. Here's what he said a little while.
It's advanced by Gregory of Nyssa that slavery as an institution should be abolished isn't one that seems to occur to Christians in the first kind of centuries of Christianity's existence.
So there you heard him say Gregory's idea that the institution of slavery should be abolished doesn't occur to Christians around that time. It took time, as we all acknowledge. I mean, when Gregory gave that sermon, it was basically ignored. However, again, there's other scholars. Let's pull some up. And then I'm going to give you an extended quote from one scholar that's going to put this in context. But so Adam Couchman wrote a book on Gregory. He says, Gregory of Nyssa goes beyond the accepted Pauline ethic. Respecting one's slaves and treating them humanely was not enough. Gregory simply calls for the abolition of this practice, the first theologian to do so. Okay. Teresa Urbensky. Peter Garnsey describes how we first see the opposition to slavery as an institution articulated by the theologian Gregory of Nyssa. And he ends with the words, it will surprise no one that the hero of my narrative is Gregory of Nyssa, who perhaps uniquely saw that slavery itself was a sin. In an earlier chapter, he discusses one of Gregory's homilies, where the bishop had put forward arguments for the abolition of slavery, which Garnsey describes as unique in the surviving evidence. Now, there are historians who do agree with Dan that Gregory didn't call for that. But I think Garnsey puts this into context and explains the problem, the disconnect some are seeing. Well, some can say he did, some can say he didn't. So I have an extended quote here. By extended, I mean 3 pages. So Gregory was drawing on a long tradition of liberal thought in both pagan and Christian circles, stressing the shared humanity of slaves and masters and their common potential for virtue and for salvation, which nevertheless set easily with a readiness to tolerate and even justify the institution. The core of Gregory's argument, which together with rhetorical skills for which he was famous, transforms into a fierce attack on slave owning. It is the insistence that man was made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore by his nature is both free and sovereign in the earthly sphere. Slave owning, setting up as master of the image of God, involved the denial of that which is specifically human in mankind. It is to oppose God, challenge natural law, and sculpture his plans by mankind to rule with dignity and honor on earth. It is the sin of pride in its own manifestations. Now he goes on say these are arguments for the abolition of slavery, though they are not flagged as such. Why would he say that? Well, let's go on. Let's read more of Garnsey here. Gregory stops short of urging that the whole institution should be done away with, or even instructing his audience to emancipate their own slaves forthwith. So what was he doing? And what did others think he was doing? He was preaching a sermon about sin, specifically the sin of pride. He goes on to say other sins, love of money, usury, drunkenness, love of pleasure, in a highly rhetorical fashion. His attack on slave owning as a sin, we might say he was bound to be ineffectual, for we are all sinners and no one is perfect. There was no chance of abolishing sin, and especially the sin of pride, under which, according to Gregory, slave owning was to be subsumed. What prospect then of abolishing slavery? So now it sounds like Garnsey is sort of on the same page as Dan. But again, he goes on to say this. These might seem unnecessarily defeatist. To concede that the message was a moral one and not designed to overturn an institution is not to deny the homily of practical purpose, that of influencing the behavior of his audience. They were apparently being instructed to give up the sin of avarice, usury, drunkenness, pleasure-seeking, and slave owning. Of the sins, slave owning was the easiest to give up. A visit to a magistrate or a church or a province where manumisso in ecclesiasta was permitted would do the trick. And if this had been part of an orchestrated attack on slave owning launched from every pulpit in Christendom, then what? So here's his point. Gregory is not a politician. He was preaching to people. He was basically saying, hey, this is sinful. You should stop doing it. So slave owning is a sin. You should stop sinning in any way you can. It's easy to stop owning slaves. Therefore, you should free your slaves and stop being slave owners.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not, as you said earlier, the difference between locution and illocution. It's like he doesn't say the exact words. Slavery should be abolished. Therefore, people like Dan can say, well, he didn't actually say those words. Yes, but you got to read his argument. You got to understand what he's doing. He's basically saying, this is a sin. Okay, under God's law, everyone should be free. No other man can own another man. Stop owning slaves. It's easy to stop doing this. Therefore, Gregory is not saying like government, emperors, kings everywhere, make laws to end slavery. What he's telling his people, his people in his audience, sorry, I forgot the word. He's telling them, hey, go out and free your slaves. You should do this. He's basically saying, because he's a preacher, he's talking to people. He's telling them to stop slavery. He's not like petitioning a government. So that's why his argument is abolitionist, even though, as you said earlier, he doesn't say the exact words. However, Tom Holland, Peter Garnsey can say these are abolitionist arguments. That's what he's basically doing. It's not hard to see that.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add? Or is that good?
Not at the moment. There's a lot of stuff that you can talk about, but I don't know if right now is where I want to say anything else.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is like we also need to ask a simple question. What caused Gregory to cherry pick out the good things of Greek philosophy and reject the bad? Okay. First of all, the idea that man is by nature free is in the Bible, like in Galatians 5:1-13, 1 Peter 2:16, John 8:6. So like this idea that Greek philosophy was influencing his thought. No, Gregory was picking the things out that align with his theological and moral framework. No one's saying that he was completely independently free of Greek thought. But like the question we need to ask, why was he and later Christians cherry picking aspects of Greek philosophy and rejecting the bad stuff? Like when Aristotle talks about slavery being natural. Why were they doing that? Well, it has a lot to do with their Christian convictions, because Christianity is the main ingredient that led to the end of slavery. Dan is trying to downplay that. And that's not fair. That's not consistent with what Gregory is talking about, which we'll get into in a minute, because I'm going to pull up the exact quote here.
Wasn't it Stark also in his book where he even said theological proclamations historically were the precursor to like political and legislative reformation?
I think
could have
so.
sworn that was Stark.
Maybe. No, Rodney Stark, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he argues that in The Triumph of Christianity.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah. Yo, Jolly Vikings here. He's been on my channel. The most important part of this discussion is the fact that Christian societies are the only ones which had large-scale mass slavery and yet abolished it. Exactly. We talked about that at the beginning. Absolutely right. Like, we're just pretending that isn't what happened. Like, this is absurd.
And this brings up another objection. We have within Stoicism this principle of all humans having a rational soul, being by nature free. And that results for some Stoics in an argument against the morality and the justice of slavery, and for others it doesn't. And the point I want to make here is that just because you have a principle that can lead to the rejection of slavery does not mean that it is inevitable that it will, or that it has to, or that that's the only valid interpretation or outcome of that principle. That principle can exist for over 1,000 years without inspiring an objection to slavery, which is what happened for the consensus view within Christianity. It existed just fine, even in light of those Greek philosophical principles, without deciding, hey, we have to get rid of slavery. And so,
okay, so this is a very odd argument. I'm not even really sure if I fully understand what he's trying to make. I don't think, again, it doesn't really address the main point. The main motivations for the abolitionists was Christianity. Okay. Dan seems to be confusing hypotheticals with what actually happened in reality. What actually happened in reality is Christian societies ended slavery, and they argued primarily from their scriptures. We can discuss all sorts of hypotheticals and possible worlds. That doesn't change the actual reality on the ground.
I still want to know. One of the things that really bothers me here is that he's just generally poking or pointing and gesturing in the direction of Stoics and all these other Greek philosophical schools of thought, but he's not telling us who. Like,
yeah,
I want to know. I want to know who he thinks is going to be a part of what influenced Gregory in a specific way that he like. Give us a model to actually work with and test against, other than you just kind of saying like, "Well, we have this generic stuff over here." Give me something that I can actually work with. As far as like the inevitability thing, there's a weird dorky distinction that I think we need to make here, which is, does the theological idea necessarily entail the abolition? I would argue yes. Stoicism doesn't logically entail the abolition of slavery. You're gonna have to attach some stuff to Stoicism. So that's one side of the coin. I really want to know what exactly it is that Dan's trying to get at here, but the language is way too murky to try to really interact with beyond what I can do here, I guess, at this point.
Well, he's being vague, and it's not fair. I mean, like, he says, like, well, Greek thought influenced Gregory, but we just put up the quote from Gregory. Look at what he's citing. He's citing the Psalms. He's citing Genesis. He's not saying, oh, because the Greek philosophers, we know that. No, I mean, look, what is his primary motivations here? Dan doesn't actually quote Gregory, and I'll just put it on the screen for you can see. If you go into Gregory's work, what are his primary motivations? It's Genesis 1. It's the Psalms. It's his allusions to Paul in Galatians. Okay, that's his primary motivation. Maybe you can see a sprinkle of Greek thought here. But again, you can get that in the Bible in places like Galatians 5:13, 1 Peter 2:16, John 8:36. Okay, maybe the wording, I'm not going to say that there's no influence from Greek philosophy, but this is, again, as you said earlier, turning a mountain into, or a molehill into a mountain here. Like he's just, it's whataboutism to its extreme. Yeah, there were other influences, therefore we can't say Christianity was Gregory's main motivation. It's like, sir, like, just look at what he's saying. What is he primarily quoting? What is he primarily relying on? It's not the Greek philosophers. His obvious main motivation is the Christian scriptures.
And even if the Greek philosophers that Dan wants to gesture towards did call for the abolition of slavery, we don't have surviving text of that, right? We have Aristotle talking about some people that might have talked about their ethical qualms of slavery, but we don't have those writings. And on top of that, those are clearly failed movements when you look at the Greco-Roman world prior to Christianity. So I don't know that this really helps his case too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's play this next section here.
In order to argue that Christianity was the single catalyst, independent of all other worldviews.
Dan, where did I say it was the single catalyst?
Wait.
Like, seriously, like this endless straw man. It's like he just read that into like what I was saying off the cuff on Timcast.
Maybe, okay. When I might just be mishearing them then. Is Dan saying that you're saying that Christianity is the singular catalyst for this, or is Dan saying, in order to make the argument that you want to make, Christianity has to uniquely be isolated to explain this?
Okay, well, if it's the first, which I think is what he's doing. I obviously never said that. If it's the second,
Mhm.
that's absurd. Like, no historian does that. Like, you're basically setting
Yeah.
such an incredibly high standard that no one could ever reach. And it's like, that's just not what the data shows.
Which would just be self-defeating, first of all, in the first, because if that's the standard, if that's the methodology you want to employ, then why are you even trying to gesture towards Greek philosophers?
Yeah.
To
It's defeatist. It's
yeah.
philosophical nightmare right here.
He was the single catalyst, independent of all other worldviews. You kind of have to suggest that it's inevitable that principle leads to the other thing, but it's not. And that's one of the things that undermines this argument that, well, yeah, it took 1,500 years, but it had to get there. It was inevitable that it was going to get there. That's just not supported by the data.
So the data apparently shows that it's that it would not have got that the Christian tradition would not have gotten abolition. I'm guessing Dan has access to other timelines and was able to see into the multiverse and know that Christianity did not actually lead to abolition as it did. Like, what data is he talking about? The only way he could know that is if he could see Christianity acting out in different ways in different possible worlds, which he doesn't have.
It's not even just that. We have the data that actually does line up with our claim. Like, I wrote down one example is child sacrifice in the ancient world. Christians explicitly condemn it because of the Imago Dei. Eventually, it becomes abolished. The same thing with, like, you have Martin Luther King. He condemned racial injustice as a sin. The illocutionary force of that was the eventual abolition of racism and slavery. Like, usury, you mentioned that earlier. Like, things take time. Reformation takes time. Does Dan think communities just will hear an argument and they're gonna just change their mind as a whole community when these things are deeply ingrained into these communities? No, like, these things take time.
Yeah, and we'll get to Tom Holland later because I'm going to play some more clips of him and quote from his book directly. But yeah, that's exactly what the argument Tom Holland makes. Like, this takes time for this stuff to filter down and change. When I was interviewing Tom Holland, he said, like, people were trying to figure out what Christianity meant and what the implications were. And then sometimes it resulted in horrible things. Like, he talked about the mistreatment of Jews in Spain, for example. And he's like, but what happened is, like, people recalibrated. People said, hey, we should get back to the teachings of Jesus. This aspect is wrong. And so he talks about Christianity like being a city on a fault line. Like, you build up these certain cities and every now and then there's a shake underneath that causes everything to be restructured back to what Jesus originally taught. And so, yes, it's going to take time. Why would we not expect it to? If you read, for example, Rodney Stark's book, he actually does a lot about this. He talks about how Christianity was not like incredibly influential the moment Constantine came on the scene. Like, it took times. Like, you can read documents throughout the Middle Ages about churches being empty or clergymen just sort of being put in positions, not even understanding the Bible. Like, it took time for this stuff to filter into the general populace.
I can already think about the objection in my to this too. It's going to be like, well, okay, if people thought this is immoral, like, why did it take time? Have you like encountered a human in the first place ever? Like, have you read the Bible first of all and seen like people in the Old Testament knowing that worshiping false gods is wrong, yet that's the common theme of what the Israelites are doing wrong in the first place? Have you like, even today, how many people do you run into that are like, yeah, I know this is bad, but like, I'm still gonna do it, kind of a thing, or I'm trying to get better. Things take time. Like, that's common human experience.
I know. They just think like Christianity was just going to have like a firm grasp on the culture by like 400 AD and like all of the results should have happened just instantaneously. That's just not how history and human psychology works.
No.
By the data. Connecting those dots requires certain contexts, certain circumstances, certain decisions and choices. And the entire history of Christianity shows that it took an awful long time for enough people to arrive at that non-necessary conclusion to actually change the consensus view.
And that, again, doesn't challenge at all what caused the abolitionist movement, what their primary motivations were. Again, this is just whataboutism. Like, it has nothing to do with the study of the actual abolitionist movement. And again, Rodney Stark and Tom Holland have addressed this in their books. Christianity did not completely take over the culture. Like when Muslim conquerors came through, like they came to the city of Carhae, they found more pagans in the city than Christians. Pagan temples were still open in places like Greece until I think about the 800s or 900s. Like magical practices were still being done in the countryside of rural Europe for centuries. People were not reading the Bible every day. Most people couldn't even read in the Middle Ages. It took time. Rodney Stark points out that at the founding of the U.S., only 17% of people belonged to an organized church. By about the time just before the Civil War, that had more than doubled. It took time. Most people just were not interested. They were focused on other things throughout these centuries. It took time for Christianity to saturate the culture. And surprisingly, when we see the printing press, when we see more Christian materials getting more available to people in generally, slowly after that, we see a lot of great developments, particularly the abolitionist movement. Like, so again, this is just missing the whole history here that historians have already addressed Dan's concern. All right.
Yeah, I got nothing to add just yet.
And that slowly began to change. And you can see it in the scriptures. Like go to like Ephesians 6, where Paul says, slaves obey your masters. But no one quotes right after that in Ephesians 6, where Paul says, and masters do likewise to your slaves. So he doesn't outright say slavery should be wrong, but he undercuts any sort of like reason for slavery to exist. If masters need to do exactly to their slaves as slaves doing, there's no institution of slavery at that point.
So 2 concerns with this bit of rhetoric. The notion that what the pseudo-Pauline author wrote here in Ephesians 6 undercuts any reason for slavery to exist or denies it a moral foundation requires a specific interpretive outcome. And specifically an interpretive outcome that the majority of Christians would not agree with for well over 1,500 years, not until the 19th century, after an awful lot of societal change. And after...
Real quick, that's an appeal to popularity. It's not going to address the arguments we're going to present or my reasoning.
Yeah, this is just rhetoric.
Oh, no, you only his opponents do that. He never does rhetoric, sir. I don't know what you're talking. He's always, he always is throwing that out, but he's never the one just doing that.
After
sorry,
the
that
specific
just really
question of the morality of slavery became one of the most acute sociocultural crises of the last 500 years. That does not support this presupposition that that interpretive outcome is an inevitable one, or is the only legitimate one, or was the intended meaning all along. Those conclusions are not supported by any data. Those conclusions can only be presupposed. And this brings up the second objection. The notion that what the masters are supposed to do to the slaves is this service with enthusiasm, thereby somehow undercutting the reason for slavery to exist, doesn't fit with how the majority of scholars agree this text was intended to be understood.
And by majority, he's going to quote 2. One, he's going to misunderstand. But even if he's right, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say one thing, because he listed a bunch of things in the very beginning. Here's a 4th option on the table that, because Dan wants to say, like, this isn't the way that the original text was meant to be understood, blah, 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 blah. Well, here's another option on the table. This text is just following the teleological trajectory, ethical trajectory of the scriptures, meaning we have the Edenic vision where there is no slavery. Then after the fall, there is slavery and all this brokenness. And then after, when Jesus is supposed to come back and redeem everything, there is no slavery again. The teleological ethical trajectory is one of progressively moving the ethical lines of scrimmage. So that just falls right in line. Like that, then this isn't going to be an objection, even if we are misreading the text.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
For instance, we can look at Stephen Fowler's New Testament Library commentary volume on Ephesians, the paragraph at the bottom. This section concludes with a brief address to slave owners, continuing to call them Kyrii, masters. Paul admonishes masters to do the same to their slaves. Doing the same may refer back to serving wholeheartedly in verse 7, by having both parties serve each other. This would certainly fit with the call to mutual submission that started this passage in 5:21. It seems more likely, however, that Paul is urging slave owners to extend the same disposition of integrity and singleness of heart that they owe to Christ to their slaves as well. And
now, before we move on, so I looked at this. One of his sources at the bottom is Andrew Lincoln. So I decided to read Andrew Lincoln because I try to check those sources, and I'm not sure that's what Andrew Lincoln is actually saying. So I've got another extended quote that, again, is 3 pages, but I want to make sure we get the context here so we get this right. Okay, here's what Andrew Lincoln is saying in his commentary. Do the same does not refer specifically to doing good. Well, wait a minute. I thought that's what Dan just said. I thought that's all it was just about doing good. He says, but rather it's having a corresponding attitude that is required of the slaves, namely making their service of the one heavenly master determinative for their actions. Both masters and slaves have the same Lord, and therefore both have the same standard of conduct in their relationship to each other. The writer reminds Christian masters that they are under the same Lord, Christ, as their slaves, and are therefore his fellow slaves. So we're all on the same level. If masters realize this, it will mean that, although they have power, they will not abuse it by heavy-handed threats of punishment, treating their slaves as property on whom they can arbitrarily work out their frustrations. The mutual relationship of master and slave before their Lord is stressed twice more, and each time the insistence on this is much more explicit than the equivalent parentheses in Colossians. First, the writer reminds masters that both their and your master is in heaven, whereas Colossians 4:1 simply has, you also have a master in heaven. Then he adds, and there is no partiality with them. So in Ephesians, Paul, not pseudo-Paul, but Paul says, there's no partiality, guys. This thought has now been employed in connection with both groups in Ephesians, in contrast to Colossians, where it is only used in regard to slaves. Minton notes the appropriateness of the emphasis on impartiality being used in the address to masters rather than to slaves, since the higher up in social status people feel themselves to be, the more likely they are to be expected to be in accord with special considerations. J.M. Bassler analyzes the way in which Paul adapted the tradition about God's impartiality and made it the theological axiom behind his advocacy of the equality of Jew and Gentile in the church. She also notes correctly that the apostles' vision of impartiality was reapplied in the household code in a way that was not foreign to his own statement in Galatians 3:28. If social conditions did not permit or encourage at the same time a full emancipation movement to realize in history the pragmatic neither slave nor free, yet it is clear that there was within the Christian communities a movement apparently rather widespread to relax the distinction between master and slave and the conditions of servitude. This attitude reflected in the codes could also appeal to the divine impartiality, which now has Christ as its agent. In Ephesians 6:9, the assertion of Christ's impartiality is part of the warrant that grounds the exhortation to masters, reminding them that their higher social status gives them no advantage in Christ's eyes, and that they are to treat their slaves in the light as fellow servants of the heavenly master. So, in other words, when I read this, it doesn't seem this is what Lincoln is saying. Lincoln seems to be saying equal submission. There's no partiality. It's not what it seems that we're getting in that actual commentary there. So maybe he's just referring to the commentary as of people have talked about this, but Lincoln seems to be suggesting that what's actually happening here in Ephesians, let me put up the verse just if we can just see here. In Ephesians 6:9, masters do this say to them and stop threatening them, knowing that he who is both the master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with them. Other words, you're both equal, so you should submit to them the way they submit to you. Now, maybe I'm misunderstanding Lincoln.
Submission.
Exactly. Maybe I'm misunderstanding Lincoln. That could be the case. However, I seem to think that Lincoln is contrasting here, and he seems to be arguing there is an aspect of mutual submission here in what Paul is saying, and that's why I gave the extended quote so you guys can see where I'm coming from. Anything you want to add on there?
Not really. Yeah.
All right. Let's just continue on.
And we can look at Darrell Bock's Tyndale New Testament Commentary volume on Ephesians as well. At the very top, he's just finished quoting verse 9, then says, the call to the masters is that they should have the same respect and awareness that the Lord is watching how they act in their use of authority. This awareness matches the sense the slaves are to have as they serve their masters. And you can look at a variety of different commentaries. This is going to be the predominant view of what was initially intended and initially understood for this passage, which means that reading that we need to be inevitable to insist that Paul is the origin of the abolition of slavery is not supported by the data.
So let's be clear, Dan, your only data is consensus. And as Joel Carreco says, consensus is a tool, not a right. You didn't actually give any data. That's the correct reading. You just appealed to authority and said it's the consensus. That's not data. Let's give you some actual data here since you don't want to do that. Let's start with Darrell Bock's book here, the page you quoted. So here I have it up here, but you didn't quote at the bottom down here. There is a hint of mutual submission of 5:21, that is Ephesians 5:21 here, because the point is that all submit to the Lord. So Dan wanted to quote this section up here. He didn't want to quote this here. And as I said, I emailed Darrell Bach because I wanted to get the exact. So I asked him, like, what is your take on this? On 3/6/2025, he emailed me back and he gave me permission to share this. He says, the remarks on all submit to the Lord opens up mutual submission. The role is to treat slaves responsibly. So I do suggest Ephesians 5:21 is on view. Everything here is rooted in servant leadership. So Darrell Bach is not just saying it's about doing good. It's about mutual submission and servant leadership. Dan seems to have read a couple lines of Darrell Bach, assumed he understood it, and then jumped to conclusions. Whereas Bach seems to be actually arguing, no, that's part of it, but there's also mutual submission. Also, one of Darrell Bach's sources here is, let me scroll down a little bit here so you guys can see that, is Harold Hoehner and Thielman. Now, Hoehner does agree with Dan. I looked it up. Harold Hoehner is saying that Dan is right. Thielman is not. Thielman is actually disagreeing, and he's actually giving a bunch of arguments. He gives 3 arguments that this is about mutual submission, which have not been addressed by the scholars I've seen on Dan's side, at least what I've found so far. So again, because I want to make sure we're getting all of this context right, extended quote here. This is my last extended quote, though. So Frank Thielman says, presumably Paul does not mean that masters should obey their slaves, but 3 considerations make it probable that the radical nature of the statement should not be downplayed. First, the context moves in the direction of mutuality between slave and master. Paul has spoken of fleshly masters in verse 6:5, subtly reminding slaves and masters alike that they all are ultimately subject to another master. He says this explicitly at the end of verse 6:8 and the end of 6:9. So again, he reminds them of equality with his comment that the slave and free will be treated in the same way at the final judgment, and that there's no favoritism with the heavenly master to whom both are ultimately subject. Second, there was a strong conviction in early Christianity originating in the teachings of Jesus that those in positions of authority should adopt the role of slaves with respect to those under their authority, like Jesus, for example. The Paul of the Undisputed Letters was aware of this ethic of mutual service, and it is likely that the mutual submission articulated at the head of the household code in verse 5:21 is indebted to it. Third, the theology of Ephesians 1-3 is deeply indebted to the notion that human beings are united with one another in the rebellion against God and in the opportunity to become newly created human beings through faith in the gospel. It is plausible to think of mutuality expressed in the phrase, do the same things for them, as originating from this view of humanity. With this command, Paul has cut the thread that held the institution of slavery together. So, Darrell Bach's own source is in agreement with us. And Darrell Bach, when I talked to him, is in agreement with us. Dan took him out of context, which means...
Gentlemen, we got him.
Sorry. All right, let me add one more argument to this whole picture before we move on, because I think this is an important argument. This is where I was actually originally getting this from, was reading David De Silva. So David De Silva is a great scholar. I read his first edition. I've been meaning to read his second edition. I checked, and I think he says the same thing here because I saw the same quotes. But he says, the instruction to masters opens very strangely, calling on the masters to do the same towards their slaves as Paul has enjoined on the slaves to do to their masters, namely to render service with enthusiasm as the Lord, knowing that whatever good we do, we will receive the same again from the Lord, whether we are slaves or free. This is the most stunning return to the topic of mutual submission that opens Paul's household code of Ephesians 5:21, showing that it is unavoidably the guiding principle for the Christian master as well as the slave. So what is he talking about? We've been hinting to 5:21 here for a little while. So let's just pull that up. Paul is going through the household code here that he's getting from Aristotelian logic. Yes, I dare say he's getting a lot of this from Aristotle. I know. We were admitting that it wasn't solely. You see, they admit it. It wasn't the solely responsible. Okay. Anyway, notice what he says. David De Silva's point is that before he goes into the household codes, slaves and masters, children and parents, husband and wives, he adds a preface, submitting to one another out of reverence to Christ. Husbands and wives, yes, you have this household code, but also submit to each other. Wives submit to husbands. Husbands, you're a servant leader, do the same. That is still in view. Oops, I hit the wrong thing. That is still in view when we get back to Ephesians, is what David De Silva, Daryl Bach, Frank Thielman have basically been pointing out. Mutual submission is still in view by the time we get to this end point. So when we go through these arguments, 521 is in view as we get from David De Silva and Daryl Bach, but we also get the 3 arguments from Frank Thielman. So at the end of the day, I don't care what the consensus says. I care about the evidence. These arguments haven't been addressed. I'm not just going to be a sheep and believe this Dan's interpretation of Ephesians 6:9 because the consensus tells me what to think. I'm going to go on what the actual evidence is here. We have really good evidence from the context that Paul, when he's writing this letter, is thinking of these. We have what we see in Ephesians 5:21, mutual submission. It's in the very verse. In the very verse, he reminds them, there is no partiality with you. And then we go to Frank Thielman's arguments. Again, we see the theology in Ephesians 1:3. We see this already idea in the Christian community about being a servant leader, and Jesus came to serve, this kind of stuff. So, like, there's a lot of arguments that support this view, and Dan's only argument was consensus is on my side, therefore I'm right. Okay, I thought we were supposed to be critical thinkers. Do critical scholars not want to encourage critical thinking?
Yeah. No, that was the biggest gripe listening to this video for me. It was just I just have a bunch of methodological critiques here. Like, one of my favorite historians in philosophy, like philosophy of history, people that I like to read is Eliezer Tucker. He's like one of the most foremost known people when it comes to this topic, like the epistemology of history. And if you familiarize yourself with a lot of the stuff that this guy says, and then listen to this video that Dan says and listen to the type of arguments Dan employs, you're going to sit there and be like, well, why is Dan making these like really bad epistemological errors when he's arguing? And it's because I don't know, but he should, like, I feel like he should know better.
What do you mean? Can you go into more about that for the audience sake?
Well, so like let's talk about, for instance, first of all, the appeal to consensus in the first place. Like, a consensus isn't going to be strong evidence for a proposition being true, especially just because of the underdetermination of historical evidence. Historical evidence is not going to be deterministic. It's going to be probabilistic, and you're going to have to make inferences to the best explanation. But if consensus is built upon some axiomatic bedrock claims, well, then the consensus is worthless. Another thing, if I can find it really quick, is he in his book Our Knowledge of the Past, he actually highlights the problem of Kuhnian consensus, and the basic idea is there's a type of consensus where it reflects more so an adherence to the claims of other scholars rather than scholars coming to these conclusions for themselves.
Right.
It's more so just kind of playing along and playing by the rules. And this is like a very real phenomena within the scholarship. And so consensus isn't going to do that well, because consensus doesn't really tell you about why the scholars believe what they believe, what the arguments are, why, if they actually hold to that position, or if they're just kind of adhering to the rules of the politics of scholarship. There's so many issues here. I could go on and on. I mainly have methodological critiques.
Well, again, the actual evidence doesn't support Dan. The data doesn't. Again, we see the opening prologue to the household codes where Paul says, submit to one another. We see this idea of equality in the surrounding context in Ephesians 6. We see this idea of servant leadership already in the Christian community. And we see, again, this similar theology in Ephesians 1-3. So again, appealing to actual scholars who put forward arguments, their arguments have not been addressed. What Dan now needs to do is address those arguments without being ad hoc. Just can't come up with ideas to explain them away. He needs to offer a better interpretation of the full context that fits with his view and not this view. But I don't think that's possible. I having gone through a bunch of possible scenarios of what he could do, I don't see a way he could do without becoming a little ad hoc at least. But again, he doesn't address that. His only data is appealing to consensus. So he's just not actually using data. He's using a dogma that the consensus is always going to be right, or the consensus is most likely going to be right. And that's just not a good. So we're not actually getting data over dogma from Dan here. We're getting the opposite here. And that's what we're presenting in these extended quotes. So you actually get the data. So you want to see why I came to those conclusions in about Ephesians 6. And again, he quoted 2 scholars. One of them didn't even agree with him. He got him out of context. So yeah. All right. We've been putting off super chats for a little bit, so I'm going to get to some now, and then we're going to get to the rest of his argument. I'm going to bring up some more stuff from Tom Holland. Would you be willing to look at the exegetical argument for full preterism from Don K. Preston? Thanks for not blocking me. LOL, love your channel. I'm not going to block you. Just because we disagree on stuff, that doesn't mean you get blocked. Dan. So anyway, yeah, because he has me blocked still. Sorry, couldn't help. But it's because I wasn't engaging in good faith, and by that I mean I was just using his own tactics against him, which says a lot.
And you don't actually give arguments, Mike. You just use rhetoric.
Right. I just use rhetoric. Yeah. But I'm the one engaging in bad faith. Yeah, I've looked at some of full preterists and stuff. I'm not convinced. I think Sam Frost puts forward some good replies to that stuff. But I'll when I have time, I'll take a look again. Thank you, Logan, for becoming a member. You need food to survive, but what about choking on a biscuit? Thank you, John, the press writer. Deuteronomy 20:10-17 states that they shall do forced labor for you, even though the destruction is hyperbole. How do you explain the forced labor? Yeah. So the one thing I always say is, like, we have acknowledged, both Dan and I, that slavery is in the Old Testament, but we appeal to places like Ezekiel 20:26, Matthew 19, 1 Samuel 8, that points out that was a compromise with a stiff-necked people. That's not what God wanted for all people in all times. That was getting them a little further along, creating moral progress so they could get them to a better place. That society just simply was not ready to end slavery and couldn't. Listen, God gave them some laws, and let's be honest, they couldn't even keep those. They immediately started worshiping idols, engaging in Canaanite practices. Just read Judges. I mean, like, they couldn't even keep the bare minimum of what God wanted of them. You expect them to abolish slavery? No, it would not have happened.
Yeah, and just look at the heavenly ethic. There is no slavery in the new earth. There is no slavery in heaven. If you're gonna find out what God's ideals are, you're gonna find it there, right? I don't know what else has to be said there.
Where in the Bible does Paul say slavery is bad, and the only reason I'm not condemning it is because it might start a revolt? Exactly. Where? Therefore, they never did it. Nothing you can use in the Bible can ever be used against slavery. Nothing. Yes. McClellan has McClellan has said previously that he believes in the LDS Church due to faith and not evidence, but goes ultra skeptic on anything outside of his views. It's a fair point. Fair point. However, he does say his scholarship is in like contradiction with LDS views, and he is like he doesn't explain how he tries to rectify that. Any books you recommend on Bible and evolution? Oh, Than could probably recommend some. I'd just recommend like John Walton's books on how to better understand Genesis, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I have a really nuanced position, I guess, which is like I don't think that the Bible teaches an old Earth or teaches that evolution is true or anything like that. I just think that what the Bible teaches allows for an old Earth and allows for evolution. And so, like what Mike said, the John Walton series are really good. Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser is going to be really good. But the thing is, like, none of these books are going to necessarily target evolution. What they're going to do is unpack what's really happening in the text and how we should understand it. If you want something that's going to be slightly more tied to the topic of like evolution and maybe Adam and Eve and stuff like that, the Genealogical Adam and Eve by what's his name?
Joshua Swamidass.
Yeah. Swamidass. I wanted to say Sijuwad, but I'm like, no, it's not. It's not. What is it?
Swamidass. Yes.
Swamidass.
Good. We have over 1,000 people watching right now, so 38 of you better not leave because we dropped below 1,000. So I'm counting on you all to stay there. Did God create evil? I know this question is kind of off topic, but I just want to know your answer. I'm enjoying the content. No, some people try to use a verse in Isaiah to say that, and really it's probably just means more calamity. No, he did not create evil. Evil is a privation of good. So it's like cold is just the absence of heat, or darkness is just the absence of light. Can't spell McClellan without L. Oh, that's mean. But you can't eat. There's 3 L's. Oh, you see, there's 3 L's.
What does that stand for?
Mike, I'm a big fan, but I don't think Christian abolitionism is a good argument, or is good or an argument. It is peculiar that the view of chattel slavery in Christianity came about during and after the Age of Enlightenment. Well, are you saying that slavery should exist? Because them fighting words, sir.
We also have, other people during the Enlightenment, like Hume, that was way worse. Just saying. The Enlightenment did not give way to the ethical ideals that you think it did, if you want to tie it to the Enlightenment.
Yeah. And like, I mean, the idea that like just it happened after the Enlightenment, we're going to get to that. That's not true. Like Christians were already working to end and limit the stretch of slavery throughout the first millennium of Christianity. Like read St. Anselm, for example. Like popes were actually doing things to limit the reach of slavery throughout the realms. Like this idea that it just came about after the Enlightenment. No, the Christians were already starting to put in measures. There's a reason serfdom came out of the Middle Ages. It was like it's like we really shouldn't have slaves anymore. Let's have another like system. Like it was another step in the right direction. Serfdom is not good. It's not the best, but it's better than slavery. And that comes out of the Middle Ages in Europe for a reason. Hey guys, big fan, or should I say Than? JK, what books would you recommend to learn Trinitarian metaphysics? Dr. Joshua Sijuwati. Bo Branson's work. So Sijuwati, Bo Branson, I'd say those are going to be two guys you should go to for sure on that. Stay away from Islam, though.
I thought I had a physical copy of this book. There's literally there's a book called the Oxford Handbook to the Trinity or something like that, or Trinity Metaphysics. I think it's called. Email me. I can send you a few.
How do you respond to the moral luck argument? I don't remember what that is.
There's the basic idea is that some people can't be held culpable for some ethical ideas or ethical considerations just because they might have to do X, Y, or Z because of their situation that they've been put in. It's just bad luck. Okay. Well, I guess it depends on what do you mean. How do you respond to it? Like, there are going to be places where people can't be held culpable because they're just the hands are forced, and there's going to be places where they're not going to be held culpable, but it doesn't really like require an answer or response in the sense that like it's going to hurt Christianity or moral realism or anything like that.
Yeah. His rhetorical goals, the end of Christianity, are best served by making Christianity appear to not influence abolition, serpentine. Yeah, it just seems odd that he always takes the view that just unless it's just something crazy on TikTok, he always takes a view that is attacking Christianity. Like I don't know. Maybe I'm just being biased there. I don't know. As a Latter-day Saint, I want to apologize that Dan claims to be a Mormon. He's totally wrong on this and a lot of other things. Yeah, this is one thing I like about Thoughtful Faith. What's his name again? I just forgot it. I had it in my head and it was on
Jacob.
I forgot it. Jacob, that's it. I wanted to say Jake, but I didn't think that was right. Yeah, one thing I love is when like I respond to Dan, like Jake is always like, get him. It's like, I'm always laughing. It's like that's where we're at, folks. But yeah, it's interesting. He definitely doesn't. Dan does not preach Mormon theology for sure, and I understand why Mormons can be frustrated by that. Yeah. Dan, the man with the naughty plan from Sassy IP.
I don't even know what my naughty plan is, but okay.
That's part of the plan. To not know what it is. Thoughtful Faith is back. He is driven by a raging animus towards white male evangelicals for political reasons. Dan is super woke. That is his dogma. He only cherry picks data to fit that dogma. You guys are right. I mean, it's very... Go ahead. You heard it.
No, I just said we're right.
Yeah. I mean, like it definitely comes across that way. I want to address his arguments though more than anything else, and this is just a very bad case of him saying, I'm giving you the data, guys. And by data on Ephesians 6, he's just citing consensus as his data and not actually going into the arguments that have been presented for why this is what Paul is talking about, mutual submission. And even one of his own scholars admitted this may be the actual reading. So even if he like, at the end of the day, I don't think he can really put a good argument out there without being ad hoc. I guess it would just explain away or dismiss a lot of the arguments that Thielman, De Silva, or Daryl Bach give, but maybe I'm just being too mean there. Appreciate you, IP and Than. My wife is getting annoyed every night that I won't stop talking about what I'm learning from this channel. Well, you should keep annoying her. That's important stuff. You should definitely keep doing that stuff. Like, why would you just stop? Like, that's weird. Like, just keep telling her that kind of stuff.
What's more important, man? Us or your wife?
Exactly. I mean, she needs to hear this stuff. You got to think of it like that. She needs to hear this stuff for sure. So just keep on going, keep on trucking along.
Real quick, Mike, I'm getting messages from the Aether that we should do our commercial.
I don't have it pulled up right now, so he's got to send it to me because I can't find it. So Matt, send me the commercial and I'll play it, and I'll get back to that. I can't find where I put it. I don't know. I lost it. It's somewhere in my downloads folder, which is a mess. I want to earn a degree in apologetics, but schools I come across require me to be a Christian, something I'm still in the process of truly being. Advice. Oh, you know what you should check out? Trinity. Go to Trinity Radio. Braxton Hunter runs that school. He's a Christian, but they have a much more lax rules. And it's an online school coming out of Evansville, Indiana. Trinity Bible College, I think is what it's called. But excuse me. But if you go Trinity Radio, look up Braxton Hunter, look up the school he teaches, try that one. I bet he would love to have you. I bet he's not going to put dogmas on you. Because he even is, I remember talking to him, he was complaining that some schools put forward way too many like rules on students, and they don't do that at Trinity Bible College. So check out that school. I bet you'll get in. I bet you'll learn a lot there, and there's a lot of great stuff there. So yeah, I would say
there's one rule. There's one rule. There are no rules.
Oh no. Hey, do you guys think that the Greek and Russian Orthodox Church teach from the Bible and Jesus? Yes. I mean, is there things that, Protestants and Catholics are going to disagree on? Yeah. But that doesn't mean that they don't teach from the Bible. That'd be absurd.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to this video here, and then we'll get to some more super chats in a bit. So let's play this next section. So the Christian values slowly start to undercut it. And this is why Tom Holland says Christianity was like a depth charge. It took a while for these explosions to go off and spread.
So again, it sounds to me that this argument is relying on the presupposition that these interpretive outcomes that bubble to the surface in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment were inevitable, or were the only legitimate outcomes, or were what was intended all along. And I'm not sure that that's what Holland meant when he said that the theology of Paul was a depth charge that sent out these ripples that weren't felt until the 11th or 12th centuries or the Renaissance or the Enlightenment. Certainly Paul was an ingredient in the recipe that would result in this opposition to slavery. But again, Christianity was not the only ingredient, was not the primary, much less the only catalyst. These things also required the influence of Greek philosophical frameworks related to natural law, related to the notion that humanity is by nature free. This is why.
All right, well, we've already addressed it. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. It's, again, a stupid straw man, and it's missing the point. But he says he doesn't think that's what Tom Holland meant. Well, I mean, like, we could just play what Tom Holland said. I mean, that actual language I used when I was on Timcast, I got that from Paul himself. Here is what he said when he was on my channel.
And this again and again, you see this with Christianity, that it's kind of like a depth charge, that it can take time for the reverberations to spill out from the initial kind of shock. And what happens, what brings abolitionists in the 18th and 19th century to think that the Christian God wants slavery to be abolished is, I think, a confluence of two circumstances. The first is a radically Protestant understanding of how you should read Scripture. For Baptists, for Quakers, for the kind of the more radical margins of the Protestant Reformation, and particularly in the English-speaking countries, so Britain and the North American colonies and the Caribbean, where Baptists and Quakers tend to settle. They argue that it's not the words in the Bible that matter. It's how the Spirit inspires you to understand them. So unless the Spirit is upon you unless he has you've become born again with the Spirit, you cannot properly understand the Bible.
Now, again, I would expect Dan would probably disagree with that. That doesn't change the fact that's what Tom Holland said, and that's what he meant, that it was Christianity that was crucial for ending slavery. We can just go to his book. Here's what he says. Secularism owes its existence to the medieval papacy. Humanism derives ultimately from claims made in the Bible that humans are made in God's image, that his son died equally for everyone, that there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. Repeatedly, like a great earthquake, Christianity has sent reverberations across the world. So what's odd about this whole section, Than, is Dan doesn't present any data. He just dogmatically asserts, well, I don't think that's what Tom Holland meant. No, that is what he meant. Look at the context. You can go listen to the full interview to get the rest of what Tom was talking about. The title of the video is What If Christianity Never Existed? You can just read his book. He's using this language because he does say Christianity was the main motivator, and it was Christian ideas that led to abolition. So for Dan to just say, well, I don't think that's what Tom meant, shows you he's not actually doing the research. He's being dogmatic and just dismissing it because it doesn't fit with his narrative.
Yeah. And again, I'm not really sure what Dan's really trying to argue here either. I still want to know what he means by the inevitability points, the necessity points, and all these other things that he's trying to say. I'm not really sure what his position is, because like presumably if he wants to argue that our position is wrong, that means that there is another model that he thinks makes sense of the data better, but I'm just not really sure what it is.
That's
it's too vague.
That's a thing we get from scholars now. A lot of scholars is that we don't actually get a model to compare because, and this is a huge philosophical problem in scholarship. Scholars like Dan often do this. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just, this is how they're trained. This is how they think. They just attack another model and say, this is bad, this is upset, but they don't present a competing model that can better explain the data, that is more parsimonious, more plausible, less ad hoc. They just say, well, there's problems with yours. Again, no one says their model is perfect, but just attacking another model does not mean your view is somehow superior. You need to present evidence for it, and just appealing to consensus or just saying, well, that's not what Tom Holland meant is not data. It's being dogmatic.
Yes. I just, if Dan's going to listen to this, man, I just want a model that I can test against our model. And let's see which one is the best explanation and the simplest explanation of the data.
Yeah. Most of what I can get is that Christianity was only an ingredient and Greek philosophy was another ingredient. So they're just, but I mean, he's not presented evidence that Greek philosophy was just as influential. Because when you read historians that have written books on this, you read what the abolitionists were saying, you read what Gregory of Nyssa was saying. It's very clear the main motivating factor, the main ingredient is Christianity. It's not like Greek thought and Christianity. It's Christianity with some sprinkles of Greek thought.
Yes.
That's it. So with that, we have something to.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Finish your thought. Finish your thought.
Yeah. Because that and here's the main point is, what is that sprinkle of Greek thought doing in conjunction with the Christianity? Is that sprinkle of Greek thought adding to the ethical ideals of why they viewed slavery as wrong? Or is it just changing their metaphysics up a little bit? But the primary motivator for why they thought slavery was wrong was the Imago Dei. And then they used some Greek metaphysics to help them with their justification. The central question is, what best explains their calling of slavery to be sin? I'm going to say the best explanation is the thing that they call is going to be their primary explanation, which is the Imago Dei. And then on top of that, they sprinkle some natural law stuff. But Gregory would have said the natural law stuff is like the primary means. He's not going to not say what he means. That would just be weird.
So with that, I have a special commercial to show you, ladies and gentlemen, that we have developed. It's going to blow your mind.
Searching for a deeper understanding of your faith? Are you searching for a deeper understanding of your faith?
Inspiring Philosophy is your go-to resource for exploring the rich tapestry of Christian thought.
From biblical archaeology to philosophy of mind, we dive into the topics that matter.
Our content bridges faith and understanding, offering insights into God's existence and the reliability of the New Testament.
Join a community where faith meets reason and discover the answers you've been seeking.
Inspiring philosophy, where faith meets understanding. So yeah, Matt said we had to play that. Our omniscient, ever-present social media manager said to play the commercial, so we did. I'm not sure why, but he said to play it. Therefore,
Please
we did.
don't hurt me, Matt. Please don't hurt me.
Don't strike us dead, Matt. We did what you commanded. I assume you're still listening.
Sorry. I heard a noise.
Oh, it's probably Matt somewhere. All right. Let's get back into this video. Let's finish it out, and then we're gonna get to some more super chats. So start putting them in, folks. There's 1,000 of you watching. Send them in. We'll go through them all.
Those ripples don't make it to the surface until we begin to recover Greek philosophy at the beginning of the Renaissance. And then we have the Enlightenment, where it is influencing deism and rational religion and things that are departing from the Christian mainstream. So there are a lot of influences going on. And when you...
Okay, so this is just completely wrong. The idea that none of this stuff started to bubble up or come out until the Enlightenment is not true. Let me just put up my slides here again. Because again, we see this stuff coming out through the medieval period. Tom Holland talks about this in his book. Okay. He gives a lot of evidence for it. But let's talk about some other scholars. So Brian Tierney, that the humanistic jurisprudence of the 12th century, especially the writings of the medieval Decritus, may provide a better starting point. I don't know how to pronounce that word. I probably butchered it, but may provide a better starting point for investigating the origins of natural rights theories than either 14th century nominalism or the nascent capitalism of the early modern period. So no, Dan, this was not just come out of the Enlightenment. This stuff was already developing through the medieval period. Okay. In Christianity and Human Rights, John Witt Jr. says these linguistic tensions and tangles of our rights talk today are products of a 2 millennium long evolution in the West in which Christianity has played a vital role. The traditional story that the history of human rights began in the Enlightenment of the latter 17th and 18th century is becoming even harder to sustain. So again, this idea that Christianity was not working towards this, and all of a sudden during the Enlightenment, they rediscovered Greek thought and then they came up with it, is not supported by the data. For example, Alice Rio, I think is how you pronounce her last name, says that in this period, the 500s through the 1100s, Christian bishops engaged in so much philanthropic ransoming and also the insistence of laws in not selling the kingdom's people into slavery. Okay? Catherine Gerbner, great book. She says the enslavement of Christians was uncontroversial during the Roman times, but the decline of slavery in northwestern Europe, combined with the threat of Islam in Iberia and the Mediterranean, gradually led to a consensus within Christendom that Christians should not enslave other Christians. Now, notice she does cite other variables that contributed to it, but she notes this was gradual. This didn't just happen in the Enlightenment. This was something bubbling up. This is why Tom Holland talks about this throughout his book, Dominion. The idea that this stuff just came about in the Enlightenment is not what the data shows. And you can go read, you can look at people like, for example, in 1315, Louis X abolished slavery in France. In 1335, Sweden abolished most forms of slavery. In 1423, the King of Poland ordered all Christian slaves to be free. In 1477, Isabella of Spain banned slavery in newly conquered territories. Then in 1493, she banned the slavery of Native Americans unless they were hostile or cannibals. You can read, like, for example, St. Anselm was campaigning against slavery very early on. We have a lot of evidence that slavery was not just happened, like idea that we should get rid of slavery just happened post-Enlightenment. There was a lot of ideas throughout the medieval period among Christians that slavery was wrong. In fact, this is the point of Catherine Gerbner's book. She says one of the reasons that led to the transatlantic slave trade is that Europeans became convinced that Christians cannot own other Christians as slaves. That's just wrong. So they had to go elsewhere to get slaves. And then when they got them, the slave owners tried to keep them from missionaries because they thought that if they converted the slaves into Christians, they would have to free them. And then that started happening slowly. And Catherine Gerbner notes, then the language changed, not from Protestantism versus heathens, but to white versus black. So that's where a lot of that racism came out of that idea. They still wanted to own slaves. They couldn't justify it on the earlier ideas we see coming out of Europe that Christians cannot enslave other Christians. So they just changed it to this racist rhetoric of, well, we're white and we can own them because they're black. And that was wrong, obviously. But there was a lot of stuff developing throughout this history. And again, what were the abolitionists doing? They were arguing from the scriptures that slavery should be abolished. This is what we see the Quakers doing. One of the earliest slave tracts is called The Selling of Joseph. It's not like the selling of Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher. It's the selling of Joseph because they're arguing from what the scriptures gave. So there's a lot more history here. I encourage people to read Brian Tierney's book, Christianity and Human Rights, an Introduction. You can read Tom Holland's book, Dominion, is a must read for sure. Sorry, rant over.
Myself because I'm coughing. I was coughing a lot, so I muted.
Oh, that's fine. Rant over. Sorry, there was a lot there I had to go through. Let's continue on.
When you look at the 19th century, how Christians are reinterpreting the Bible because they don't like slavery, what you see is that it starts with an intuitive disgust, usually precipitated by proximity to the abuses of slavery.
But why did they have an intuitive disgust?
Exactly what I wanted to ask.
And what were they using to make their arguments? Were they saying we have an intuitive disgust because we rediscovered Greek philosophy and we know? No, they were saying that we have an intuitive disgust because the Bible demands it. And like, this is also one of Tom Holland's points, is that Christianity had reshaped the institutions and the hearts and minds of people with an emphasis on the least of these that made people start to think that maybe we shouldn't have slavery. Maybe we're all equal. And remember what Dan said earlier. Like, again, now he said earlier that this is, if Gregory of Nyssa actually called for the abolition of slavery, this would be significantly added to the argument that the Christian worldview in and of itself in isolation is the primary catalyst for the abolition of slavery. But now he seems to be acknowledging that it was Christians in the 18th and 19th centuries that started to do this. So, like,
yeah,
you know what that means.
It's hard to follow, to be honest with you. Maybe I'm just slow because I'm sick.
No, you're lagging a lot. Maybe you should actually like restart, or like you're lagging a ton. So like I'm saying something and it's like 5 seconds later you're doing it. So maybe you should like come back in, come back out kind of thing.
I'll be back.
He'll be back.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'll look at some super chats while we do this. How do you respond to the idea that the abolitionist theology was just a post hoc justification of secular institution? I think it's an ad hoc counterpoint. Well, it isn't. I mean, that's not what actually we see in the data. Abolition was just post hoc justification of secular intuition. We don't, I mean, a lot of secular thinkers like David Hume and Voltaire were trying to justify slavery. In fact, a lot of like arguments that were put forward from like John Locke were actually being used against the abolitionists. Robert Fogel talks about this. So we think like, oh, they were just doing this from a secular standpoint. But Robert Fogel notes the secular arguments failed. They couldn't work. The slave owners were able to turn those against abolitionists that were using them. Meanwhile, they couldn't respond to the Christian arguments. And that's why Ben Wright in his book, Bonds of Salvation, notes it was the churches that pushed America to war because of their cry that abolition should come. It's something that comes out of the scriptures. I've always said that I find more scholarly consensus about what is the scholarly consensus than actual scholarly consensus on the issues at hand. Glad to have a term for it now. Yeah. Good point. Thanos snaps Than out of existence. I think the fact that the Slavers Bible exists really hurts the idea that slavers appeal to the Bible. I would understand. I would want to know what you want to mean by that, because they did appeal to the Bible. No one's denying that. Every tradition everywhere tried to appeal to something to justify slavery or explain why it is the way it is. What happened, though? Out of Christians, we get the abolitionist movement. Out of the Christian tradition, specifically the Christian tradition, scriptures, we see abolition actually coming out. And there's a reason for that. Thoughts on Christians supporting bombing of Gaza? I don't know much about that situation, to be honest. I have not had time to study a lot of that. I think Israel has a right to defend themselves. I do think they go too far sometimes in that. So Not really my area of expertise there.
Is that better?
I don't know. Is that better? Say something.
Something.
That's much better. Much better. What are some of the oldest Bible manuscripts? The Dead Sea Scrolls. There's the Silver Scrolls that mention passages from Numbers, I believe, that are very, very old. I think they're even pre-exilic. But I think the oldest would be what we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls, minus those Silver Scrolls. Is there anything old? Is there anything else I'm missing?
No. Dead Sea Scrolls, and then yeah. I mean, there's a lot of dorky ways you can go down this answering this, but yeah.
Take my money. Also, is stand short for Anatheus.
Did you? I am almost I am appalled.
Athanatheus. Athanatheus. Is that it?
I'm just gonna let you keep struggle. It's Athanasius. It's Athanasius as that spelled, minus Athanasios with an O.
I'm gonna be the guy from Key and Peele. You say your name right, Athanatheus. You say your name right, Athanatheus. You want to go to war, Athanatheus? I'm for real. I'm for real.
Oh yeah, Mikhail.
Mitch A.L. is what I would say. And my middle name is Aaron. Wearing mixed fabrics was bad enough to get an explicit law against it, but slavery wasn't. Twist all you want. The facts are unavoidable. This is just okay.
And pork, Mike. Pork.
This is so bad.
Because the Old Testament tells us that wearing mixed fabrics and eating pork is evil.
Yeah, that's it. The mixed fabric things was once again about projecting order. It was about projecting this idea that they are displaying order in the ancient Near East, and this is one of the ways they do it. However, they couldn't even get those basic laws right. Like, I don't know what you want here. Like, we have verses in theology like Matthew 9, like in the Bible, like Matthew 19, which says that laws were given because their hearts were hard. So, like, that doesn't change the overall picture of Scripture here, just because and this just seems to be coming across as an argument from emotion, not actually like showing that what we presented earlier with the other verses, that this is wrong. So, do you actually have a reason here, or is like you're just arguing from emotion?
Yeah.
All right. Mike, is factory farming animal abuse? I would say to the type and depend. Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
OnlyFans chimes in. After debunking Dan, how about bunking with me? Ooh.
Would I be bunking with myself?
Oh, you can do that. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
How do we know / make sure we are not just reinterpreting Scripture to fit our current world because we don't want it to be wrong? I'm a Christian, but I worry about this. I don't want to be biased. Okay, so a couple things to keep in mind is if we are, then everyone is doing that, including Dan McClellan, who constantly says we are negotiating with the text, but then in another video will tell us this is what Ephesians 6:9 actually means. Okay, no, you're just negotiating with the text too. Stop pretending you're somehow beyond that criteria or that claim you throw on everyone. If everyone's just negotiating with the text and the text has no inherent meaning besides what we put in it, that's all you're doing too. Second, I would say about this is like I don't think that this hyper skepticism about how we read text is true. I think we have rational brains. We can use them. They're not perfect, but we can do our best to understand stuff. It's not this postmodern idea that we are just blind to everything that came before us, and we have to just constantly be adding meaning to the text. It's that is not justified from the data. I think we can look in psychology, for example, and not see any evidence of that. But also, there's a lot of things that we tend to come to agreement on. Like the overwhelming consensus of theologians throughout the ages is that Jesus did claim to be God. So there are dissenters, but it does seem to be the idea that humans are moving in that direction, and there's a lot of good data to support that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Xavier, we can't know for sure, but that doesn't mean we should just give up. Okay, we can still look at the data and do our best to try to interpret it and best understand it and come to logical and rational conclusions. I mean, are we going to do that with science? Are we going to do that with other books in history? I don't think that's the case. And I think we should give ourselves a little bit more credit and just try to do our best at the end of the day.
Yeah. I don't feel like I do that with the way I reconstruct the history, but that's because I'm confident in doing that and saying that because I employ a methodology that checks against my bias. Like I make things fit criteria, and I make sure that things are actually following a specific methodology. And even if I want an idea to be true, but it doesn't pan out with that methodology and the data doesn't support it, well, then the idea is not true.
Yeah. All right, let's finish this video out so that we can move on.
And then you go looking in the Bible for authorization for that intuitive disgust. So as usual, opposition to slavery is something that starts outside the Bible and then goes to the Bible for the proof text, which requires renegotiating with the text. And this brings us back to my metaphor of the Lego bricks theory of hermeneutics, where the Bible is not a full, complete edifice that just tumbles out in one piece when we turn over the toy box. We have to construct the meaning, and we can use.
Okay, then that's all Dan is doing. He's just constructing the meaning, ladies and gentlemen, by his own standard. Yeah, you can't just say that's what we're doing and then not do that as well. Why should we take, like, if that's all we're doing with the Bible, why should we take anything you say seriously? Why are you somehow unique and different? And we should say, and take your understanding of Ephesians 6:9. This is Dan once again debunking himself. And you know what that means?
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
All right. Like, I'm just so sick and tired of him saying that. Like, oh,
it's ridiculous. Because, look, notice something really peculiar there. Because he's talking about Christians in the abolitionist movement going into the text to interpret the text and justify or permit their intuitive disgust. But there's a huge difference between maybe somebody in that time era doing that and Gregory of Nyssa doing that, right? Gregory of Nyssa would have not had that sociological intuitive disgust, right? His disgust of this was born out of something, the Imago Dei. And the basic idea is there's this teleological ethical trajectory that leads up to the abolitionist movement, where people did feel that intuitive disgust, and then sure, maybe they went back and tried to justify that disgust by looking back into the scriptures and all that other stuff. Maybe Dan's right there, but that doesn't undercut our point, because we have a historical reconstruction and a model to explain this all.
Yeah. So, and again, what caused their historical disgust? It has a lot to do with Christianity shaping the culture, and that's just been ignored. It wasn't Greek thought for sure, because we saw the Greek philosophers and the Roman culture was perfectly fine with slavery until Christianity came on the scene, interjected very important points that changed that. So, real quick, guys, just remember, we have these on the website, link below. You can get, not that, we don't have that one. What are you doing? What are you doing? No, we're not selling that shirt. We're selling this shirt. Okay. It's linked below under merch. Not that one. You can't. No, that is false. Jesus revealed himself to Mormons the last rite. So Mormons have the new covenant. No, I think actually David Koresh has the newest covenant. So you got to keep that in mind, because he definitely came much later. So sorry, Mormons. David Koresh came after you. PLS, book my band for apologetics outreach crusades. Oh, please book my band for apologetics. Your band? Like you want a band to come play for an apologetic event?
I think he is in a band, and he wants us to book his band, to play for something we do. That'd be cool.
That's actually not a bad idea. That's actually the question, sir, is where you live. I don't want to fly you from like Fiji, so it depends on where you live.
We have conferences that we're planning. So
can you throw all your equipment in a van and try and drive like 3,000 miles if you live on the other side of the country? I don't know. Like, that's not a bad idea, actually. I'm not against it. We just gotta work out logistics.
Email me and
email Than.
Yeah, Than at inspiringphilosophy.com.
Yeah. Laws must be incremental in reforming society. This isn't merely a matter of prudence. If you impose a good regime on a bad one, you'll destroy it. Yeah, and this is actually, we see this in history. Like when the British went to India, they outlawed marriage 12 and under, and the Muslims and the Hindus rioted. If they would have tried to push like 18 immediately, there may have been a full-blown revolution. Like incremental laws changes actually work better and prevent societal collapse. So we may not like it, but that actually fits better with human psychology. How do you respond to the idea that Christianity indirectly caused Marxism? Would Marxism harms hurt the case against Christianity's causal good? Well, Tom Holland does talk about this, and it's not this idea that Christianity directly wanted Marxism or caused it. It's that people cherry-picked ideas out of the Bible and combined it with stuff that was completely anti-Christianity to create Marxism. So yeah, it did influence, but it also brought in ideas that were directly opposed to Christianity. So we got to keep that in mind. My husband and I have been loving your content. Thanks, guys. Well, thank you, Libby. And you absolutely should. Say hi to your husband for us. I would sponsor that commercial for television. Well, what are you waiting for, Ryokin?
Next time, hey, I expect to see that on a Super Bowl.
Yeah. What's going on? Let's go. Take the commercial. Put it out there. We'd appreciate that. Do you all think that thou shalt not steal entails that you should not take humans against their will? It seems intuitive that prohibits man stealing. I think that would be a good principle or conclusion you could derive from that, combined with a lot of the stuff Gregory of Nyssa says about image of God and humans being naturally free, and because God made us free, humans can't be property. So yeah, I would include that kind of stuff in there. But from that kind of stuff, I'm only here because because I only became a monthly donor, or I'll only become a monthly donor if you promise to have Jay Warner Wallace, Hugh Ross, and Fuzz Rana on your channel at some point. I could try, but they're hard to book, dude. Like some of the old guys. That. Yeah, the old guys have retired in a lot of ways. Like,
I'll find their addresses and strong arm them into coming on, Mike.
Yeah. Come on, man. That's quite a high standard to do. I don't know what you want from us. God is only obligated to be just, not merciful. Yep. He'd be fundamentally justified in commanding blank against heathens, just like genociding them. As long as we include the presupposition that all have sinned and deserve death. So if you've come to that conclusion, then yes, God has a right to enact justice on anyone who deserves death. That would logically follow, not even from Christian theology, but just from natural theology.
Yeah.
Japan banned slavery in 1590 without Christianity. Well, first of all, Christianity was actually in Japan around that time. So, like the Portuguese and the Dutch were actually over there. But let me look this up. Did Japan ban slavery?
I'm looking it up.
So I'll have to look this up. But I mean, this is then becomes a question again: why and what was actually happening there? Did it last? For my example, would be a question. And from what I'm seeing here is that there was still forced labor and indentured servitude persisted after 1590. But I'll have to look more into that. But again, that doesn't actually challenge the argument we've put forward. No one's denying that, like, you can derive good principles from other philosophies or other worldviews. That doesn't change the point that the abolitionist movement that led to the universal end of slavery throughout the world was primarily motivated by Christianity. Japan didn't actually cause that kind of struggle. Like Robert Fogel talks about this in his book, what missionaries went out to other cultures and then started banning slavery and saying this needs to be a global phenomenon. So what is actually Japan doing? Did they actually ban slavery, or was this sort of like a...
So here's what I'm finding so far, just a cursory look. So for instance, the only reason I have this, by the way, is because I'm fascinated by Japanese culture. So please don't make fun of me. I'm an anime weeb, and it finally came in handy. You were making fun of me last stream for this, but it came in handy. In Japan, in the Muromachi age, the Hall of Toyota, it actually talks about this a little bit. So the 1590 edict by Toyotomi Hideyoshi is actually the prohibition of the sale of Japanese people, specifically as slaves, to foreign traders, such as the Portuguese and Spanish people. And this wasn't about slavery wholesale. The motivation behind it was about national sovereignty and dignity of the Japanese people, and fear of like foreign influence entering into Japan. So it had nothing really to do with ethical qualms or anything like that.
Yeah. See, this is why I keep Than around. He's good for stuff like this. If I have random questions about Japan, I know I can ask him. But yeah, I mean, like I heard this when I was on Timcast last time. It was kind of like the same thing. It's like the Chinese and the Indians banned slavery, and then you look into it, and it's like, no. At one point they banned the slave trade, but not outright banning slavery. And it doesn't. That has nothing to do with the argument. The abolitionist movement that led to the universal rejection of slavery came out of the Christian tradition for a reason. Our new song's coming out Friday is about the Exodus. I'm clipping your takes on it for my promos. Hope you don't mind. Oh, use whatever you want, sir.
Send it. Yeah. Like I said, email me. And if I really like the song, I will, I don't know. I'll take a video of me working out. I'll bench some really heavy weight or something like that to it. Something like that. Use it.
Use whatever you want. I've never said you can't. Thank you, Cole. Do you think masturbation is a sin? Well, technically it is. Specifically, okay. So here's the thing. Okay, what is a sin is lusting. So it'd be desiring someone who is not your wife. So someone once asked me, let's say you're in a hotel and you're doing that thinking of your wife. I don't know if that is a sin. I don't know if Than would agree or not. I don't.
I have a really nuanced view. So I don't know. I think if you and your wife come in agreement that you'll do something like that, like if you're going to be apart or something like that, I think it's acceptable.
Yeah, and now some early church fathers, and I think Catholic doctrine would disagree because you're not aiming for procreation. Yeah, it's not part of natural law. So, but I mean, like the point, what Jesus is saying when he says, like, even if you lust after a woman in your own heart, is not to say like, you guys better make sure you do this. He's basically saying, I know no matter what you do, you won't be able to live up to this expectation. That is why I've come to take the penalty upon myself. So, yes, it's a sin. A lot of stuff we do is a sin, showing constantly how we fall short of the glory of God. So, yes, aim and strive not to, but don't beat yourself up when you fail, because we're going to fail every day. So, aim and strive not to, but just remember, God still loves you. It's going to be okay.
Yes. I would also just say, like, if you're struggling with this as a single person and you're trying to find relief of like that energy or whatever, like get in the gym, man, do something. Because I still think even if it was permissible, that we should still be like trying to cultivate our characters and cultivate virtue, and developing our chastity as a virtue and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, absolutely. Wait, you're planning a conference? What is going on, Than? Why don't you explain that?
Yeah. So part of my job here at Inspiring Philosophy is doing a bunch of the stuff that I'm really good at, which is like networking and all that kind of jazz. So
it's doing the stuff I hate. That's your job. If I hate it, you're doing it.
It was really funny, man. I wish people could have seen the difference between you and I at the college event that we did. Like Mike's hiding in like the utility closet before the event.
Listen, I wasn't hiding. I came out. I just needed a break. I was tired. Okay,
and there's me just like talking to everybody, and I'm like sick as a dog at the same time. Anyway, yeah. So right now I'm in the process of raising money specifically for.
I knew that would come in handy.
The other one with Andy and April is even better.
Yeah, I'll get that one. But yeah, go on, explain your thing.
Yeah, I'm raising some money right now. I guess this would be a good chance to even like, if you want to pull up the donation part of the website or something, Mike. You could because I'm raising money to run the conference. We need funds to run the conference. It'll be in Wisconsin. The venue is up to debate right now. We're still looking for a few more speakers, but the basic idea is like we're planning a weekend long conference in Wisconsin. I'm raising the money for it. I have staff pretty much ready to go on that kind of thing, equipment, everything, but we just need to raise some more money and then we'll have more details for you guys. it'll either be late 2025 or early 2026.
Listen, there are 1,000 people watching right now. If every one of you gave $20, we'd be good. If 100 of you just donated like $20 a month, we'd be fully funded, I'd say. Maybe, let me see. Maybe I'm not doing my math right.
Yeah, I was going to wait. Hold on.
Maybe a little bit more. Okay, so if 200 of you donated $20 a month, we would be fully funded and Than would be on full time at that point. Right now, we're still working towards that.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. But if all 1,000 of you watching like just donated like $20, we would have that conference fully funded and paid for.
Yeah.
So, you know, the link is below if anyone wants to help us with that. And of course, I also just want to put this up since you referenced it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For anybody that doesn't know, I'm Andy and Mike is April.
Thank you. They can see the names right there.
Mike is a girl.
I'm a pretty girl in the meme, okay? Are one of your debate con opponents either Bart Ehrman, Alex O'Connor, or Apologia? Maybe. I can't say either way, but I mean, I can't say either way. So I'm just gonna sit here and not give you any indications that you might be right. So just, you know, it's just you might be right. I don't know, but nothing set in stone.
Yeah.
Nothing set in stone. I can't like say it out loud because what if like it doesn't work out and we don't get things nailed down in agreement, you know, but there is something that, you know, hopefully will happen, you know. Slave argument is a disguised problem of evil. Why didn't Christians ban it? It's greater than why would God was gradual. Why can't God create a universe without slavery? Yeah, it kind of is like that.
Yeah, it bottoms out to the problem of evil.
Yeah. Thoughts on Hanson's book on Philemon? I've not read it, so I can't comment on it. So, it's on my list. It's just I haven't gotten to it because I've been focused on so much else. Yeah, I think we got through all that, and we're still under 2 hours. Woohoo! So, any final thoughts on Dan McClellan and his video on slavery?
No, not really.
Maybe
what I'll start doing is once we launch our new website, I'll just put up in our blog area. I'll just put up all the notes I had prepped that I didn't get through on our stream, so people can, I don't know, dork out on it. I don't know. Is that something people would want?
If you wanted to say anything else from your notes, now's your time to shine. I don't know. I told you to like listen. I make time markers in what I want to say at that exact point. That way, I get all my notes out.
My thing is just I have way too many things I like to say. I'd like to say.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to boil it down to methodology issues at this point. I think that's the simplest way to say it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, his argument doesn't simply work. It didn't actually show he never actually provided any data that he had the best interpretation of Ephesians 6:9. He got Darrell Bach out of context. He also didn't provide any data that Gregory of Nyssa wasn't calling for the abolition of slavery. He didn't provide any data that Christianity was not the main ingredient. He just asserted it. He didn't provide a lot of data for any of his positions. I mean, it was just sort of like dismissal. No, that's not what Tom Holland meant. No, it is what Tom Holland meant. And like at the end of the day, we gave you the extended quotes. We try to give as much data as possible for a reason so that you guys could see this is what the data shows. And again, at the end of the day, I don't care what the consensus says if they don't use good evidence.
Yes. Or a good methodology.
Or good methodology. Consensus is a tool, not a right. The data, I would say, shows that Ephesians 6:9 is about mutual submission. And we gave a bunch of arguments for that. John the book says, John said, the Son of God who takes away the sin of the world. Doesn't the gospel suggest John was confused on who Jesus was? No? No, not at all. He says he's God in the opening verse.
Yeah.
So I don't see how with that. Jesus is the Son of God and ontologically God.
Like, Matt, give me a soundboard. I would love a soundboard.
Matt, Than wants a soundboard. Send one down. Matt, send down a soundboard. Okay, Matt has heard our prayers.
Okay.
How should Christians respond to New Testament slavery verses? Colossians 3:22, Colossians 4:1, 1 Timothy 6, and so on and so on. I would say that was part of the culture. And notice, and I actually talked about this in the Timcast episode, that Dan didn't play that clip. I acknowledge they don't call for the abolition of slavery. But what they do is they basically undercut any reason for slavery to exist. Because if everyone is equal, like in the book of Philemon, there's no reason for slavery. And David De Silva talks about this in his book. If they would have called for the abolition of slavery, these were publicly read letters, that could have sounded like a slave revolt to the Romans. And they could have killed a bunch of Christians because they thought they were trying to rebel against the system. So that may have caused much worse. It may have caused a worse result. So I think in Christian theology, we can say the Holy Spirit was working through Paul to undercut any reason for slavery. And that's ultimately what happened, as the reality on the ground shows. But they acknowledge it as an institution at the time. However, they undercut any reason for it to exist. So we can acknowledge the historical context, and we can still acknowledge what comes out of the Christian tradition, the abolition of slavery. So I'm going to do a video on that, but it may not get to it till like a year from now, but we'll see. So how would John know he said that? Was he there? Okay, so I'm going to put your full thing in context. So
Yeah.
John, the book says, John says, the sons of God who takes away the sin of the world. Doesn't the gospel suggest John was confused on who Jesus was? And how would John know that? No, he said that. Was he there? Yes, I'd say he was there. I'd say John was actually a disciple of John the Baptist prior to this. That's kind of implied in the opening lines of John, the opening chapter. I mean, Jesus comes and they follow him because they were following John. So yeah, I think he may have been there. Historically, has a group ever been able to enslave another if they didn't also have the capacity to eliminate them? It was always a relative mercy. I mean, yeah, I guess you could say that. That was kind of like, if you go back to the ancient hunter-gatherer societies, you're competing with tribes, you either enslave them or kill them. Like, you don't just kick them out. I mean, because you're worried they're going to come back and try to attack you or get revenge. And this was common in the ancient world. I mean, you attack other cultures and you don't want the children to grow up and avenge them. So you end up committing slavery or mass killing. It's rather unfortunate, in fact. And we see a lot more humane laws in the Torah, though, is what I'd say. Read Matthew 11:2-3. John the Baptist is confused. Okay. Let's put up Matthew 11:2-3, and I'll get what you're saying. So now when John heard in prison about the deeds of Christ, he sent word by disciples and said to him, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Yeah, I remember Tim Keller actually talking about this verse. So John the Baptist is in prison, but he believes Jesus is the Messiah and the Messiah that has come. But he's still in prison and he's approaching the end of his life. I think John was hoping to be more of a part of that situation, to be like more than just the guy who prepared the way, but actually get to witness it. And so he's I think he's having depressive doubts at this point. He's in prison. He's not out there doing God's work. He probably just is at a very low point and is like, maybe I got this wrong. Can you just assure me you are the guy? So I think that's what he's getting at there.
Is this confusion that he's trying to point at between like the ontology, like the nature of the Messiah, or is this confusion about like what did Jesus look like? Because I think those are going to be really important points.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think John the Baptist is confused about who the Messiah is supposed to be, like substantively. But if you're gonna say that John the Baptist is confused in the sense that like he didn't realize the Messiah was going to be a guy that looks the way the historical Jesus looked, and maybe just didn't know how the Messiah was supposed to look like, or something like that, that's like, what's really at stake there, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I hope that helped. Just so everyone knows, I'm going to be live on my channel tomorrow at the same time, so 8 Eastern, and we're going to go through a video you have been demanding I go through. Like, literally, everyone is like, go through this video and respond. So we're going through it tomorrow from Esoterica, and we'll address it. So, yeah, you guys keep demanding, so therefore it will happen. So, all right, with that, we're going to close this out. Any final words, Than?
No, sir.
All right. Well, we have a video that Than made coming out soon on the secrets. What is it titled?
I have no clue what Matt's titling it. Matt!
The secret of like the secrets to Paul's resurrection beliefs, I believe is what we're calling it. So very fun.
I'm basically
title.
just you guys will see. I don't know if you want to tell them what it's about or not.
Yeah. John first sees Jesus and says he's the Son of God, and then seems to not know that Jesus is according to Matthew. No, again, I think he just reached a low point. He doesn't say in Matthew that, no, you're not the Son of God anymore. I think he's just sort of going, can you just verify? I'm at a low point. I'm in prison. They're going to kill me. Just tell me my life has not been a waste. I think that's what he's doing. So, all right, we're going to close this out. Thanks everybody for coming. And I'll be back live tomorrow on my channel. And by the way, next week I'll be in Sarasota, Florida for ApologetiCon 2. So if you want to come to Chip Bennett's church, just go to apologeticon.com, I believe, and you will get access. You'll be able to get tickets there. So if you live in around the Florida, you come see me speak. And so I'll see you guys there. All right. You made it to the end of this video, which means this message matters to you. If you want to see more content like this reaching people for Christ, you can help make it happen. Your support makes these videos possible. Click the link below and donate today. And if you want to go even deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. You'll get early access to videos, behind-the-scenes content, and a place to connect with others passionate about this mission.